At this point, we've created a release track, we've defined the production timeframe and production stages, and we also created a couple of milestones, one for a feature freeze and one for a code freeze. So we're ready to add our first release to the track. And earlier, we described a fairly typical workflow where someone from the production team creates the track and then notifies the release owners so they can add their releases to the track. So at this point, we can send a message to the release managers to let them know that the track exists and they can add their releases. But I'm going to wear both hats for this demo, so let's go ahead and add a release to the track. And we can do this in one of two ways. We can click Add Release to Track to add the release from here, or we can add the release directly from the release page. And for release managers, that's probably the more common way to do it. So we can click the Releases tab and select the release that we want to add. Now, before we add this release to the track, I'd like to point out something about this release as it exists right now. Notice that the verify and staging phases, as well as both production phases, are all set to run manually. And the Run button is enabled for all of them, so we can run any of these phases at any time. Now let's see what happens when we add this release to a track. And to do that, we click the menu next to the release name and select Add to Track. And here we can select the track we just created. And now we're being prompted to map the release phases to the production stages and milestones. When we add a release to a track, we need to map one phase in the release to each milestone and stage in the track. So we'll map each production phase to the appropriate production stage. And we'll map the verify phase to the feature freeze and the staging phase to the code freeze. And now we can add the release to the track. Notice that the verify and staging phases now have an icon that indicates that they're tied to a milestone, and we can hover over that icon for details. Also notice that the Run button for both of these phases is still enabled, but the two production phases have changed from manual to scheduled, and the Run button is disabled for both. And that's because the production phases are now controlled by the track owner and the production timeframe and stages that are specified in the track. If we view the details for one of the production phases, we can see that it's now scheduled to run at the time specified as the production stage in the track. And that time isn't here yet, so the Run button is disabled. And now that this release is part of the track, we can also see the name of the track at the top of the page. And the track name is a quick link to the track. And looking at the track, the AR Reports release is now showing up here. On the left, we can see that each phase in the release is now showing up under the associated milestone or stage. And we can hover over each phase for additional information. Each phase is also showing up in the timeline, and we can quickly see the status of each phase. And we can hover over a phase here as well. And notice that each production phase automatically has an approval tied to it. That means the production phase of the release won't run until this stage is approved. Once approved, the phase will run according to the scheduled time. So if the approval occurs before the date and time specified in the stage, then the phase runs once we hit that scheduled time. If the approval occurs after the scheduled time frame, the phase runs automatically once it's approved. So that's our first release for this track. Now let's say that a second release owner is notified that the track is ready. So that release owner is going to add their release to the track as well. For this example, both of the releases that we're going to add are in the same project, but it is worth noting that we can add releases from multiple projects to a track. So let's add this release to the same track that we just created. And we'll map the production stages to the production phases and map the release phases to the milestones. And then we can add it to the track. And we can see that similar changes occurred in this release to the verify, staging, and two production phases. Let's go back to the track. And now we can see that we have two releases in the track. But notice that the left panel is organized by production stages and milestones rather than by release. So the phases for each release show up under the associated stage or milestone. And if we expand this panel, we can see which release each phase belongs to. And each of these milestones and stages can be collapsed or expanded to make it easier to view what we're interested in.